The night shift at the hospital always carried a sense of oppressive tension. My name is Li Jie, a nurse working at the city hospital. During the day, the hospital is busy, filled with the sounds of life and activity. Sunlight pours through the windows, and there's a certain warmth in the air, despite the serious nature of the work. But when night falls, especially late at night, the hospital seems to change. Footsteps echo through the hallways, each step seeming louder than it should be, as though the sound triggers an endless series of cold, hollow reverberations. The beeping of respirators and monitors adds to the tension, as if the entire hospital is waiting for something ominous to happen. I've grown accustomed to the solitude of the night shift, but this night felt different. It was a night like any other, and I was on the night shift, assigned to the 5th floor respiratory ward. The ward was eerily quiet, with only the low hum of the respirators matching the rhythmic breathing of the patients. I had just finished my routine rounds and returned to the nurse's station to fill out the records. The clock showed 2:40 a.m., and my eyelids were growing heavier with each passing second. I looked up, casting a glance down the long, dim hallway, illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lights. Just a few more hours, I murmured to myself, sighing, telling myself that everything would return to normal once daylight broke. Suddenly, a sharp ding echoed in the silence, startling me. I looked toward the elevator at the end of the hallway. The doors slowly opened, revealing nothing. The elevator was empty. The hospital elevators were rarely used in the middle of the night, especially on this floor. At this hour, only patients from the emergency department would be transferred to this ward, but there had been no such call. My first thought was that someone might have pressed the button by mistake. However, the elevator doors paused for a moment, then closed, only to open again seconds later. I felt a creeping unease settle over me. As a night nurse, I knew that the hospital was usually silent at this time. Most of the patients were asleep, the visitors and caregivers long gone. The elevator shouldn't be moving so frequently. Cold sweat began to form in my palms as I tightened my grip on the pen in my hand. Just as I was about to continue filling out the records, a weak voice interrupted me. "Nurse, there's a child outside." My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly turned around. The voice had come from a bed near the nurse's station. It belonged to an elderly man, his body frail and hooked up to a respirator. His face was pale, and his eyes dull with age, but he was staring intently at the elevator doors. A child. I was momentarily stunned. Glancing at the clock, it was 2:46 a.m. There was no way there could be a child here at this hour. I walked over to the old man's bedside, speaking softly, "Grandpa, you must be mistaken. It's very late, and there are no children in the hospital at this time. Please, try to rest." The elderly man didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the elevator doors. Slowly, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the elevator. His lips quivered, as if he wanted to say something more. I followed his gaze, but the elevator doors continued to open and close, as if controlled by some unseen hand. A sense of unease swept over me. It was the middle of the night, the quietest time in the hospital, yet the air seemed to be filled with an inexplicable coldness. The old man's voice broke the silence again, hoarse and barely audible.
"The child is outside."
A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a strange, creeping fear take hold of me. I tried to suppress the growing dread, turning once more toward the elevator, but there was nothing there, only the empty hallway and the eerie, persistent movement of the doors. "Grandpa, you must be seeing things," I said, doing my best to remain calm, though my heart was racing. Just as I turned to leave, I felt a gentle tug on the hem of my uniform, as if something small had grabbed it. I froze. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, save for the long stretch of shadows and the unnerving elevator. Without hesitating any longer, I hurried back to the nurse's station, intending to call my colleague for help. But when I reached her, she was busy organizing medical records, seemingly oblivious to the strange events that had just unfolded. Doubt crept into my mind. Was it possible I had imagined the whole thing? I forced myself to calm down, trying to dismiss the strange occurrences as a result of my own fatigue. But the sound of the elevator doors opening and closing stayed with me, etched deep into my mind. I told myself that the previous night's events were likely caused by exhaustion and the peculiar atmosphere of the hospital. However, the lingering sense of unease remained. That night, I was once again on the late shift, assigned to the same ward. At 2 a.m., the familiar sound of the elevator reached my ears again. The elevator wasn't supposed to be in use at this hour. Instinctively, I looked toward the end of the hallway, and the doors slowly slid open once more. As expected, it was empty. I frowned, sensing that something was wrong. The hallway was empty, and only my night shift colleague and I were on duty in this area. According to protocol, the elevators in the ward should be controlled by the on-duty staff at night. They shouldn't be moving on their own. Just then, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around, but again, the hallway was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, the air around me so still it felt like time itself had paused. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening, I heard a low, soft laugh, a childlike giggle. The sound was light, playful, as though a child were playing somewhere in the darkness. It was faint, but unmistakable, echoing through the empty hallway as if it came from all directions at once. I held my breath, scanning the area, but saw no one. A shiver ran down my spine. That laugh felt as though it had tapped into a deep-seated fear within me. I couldn't bear it any longer. I ran to the other side of the ward, finding my colleague, Xiao, a seasoned nurse who was known for a fearless, carefree nature. I explained what had just happened to her. Xiao simply shrugged and smiled. Don't think too much of it. Night shifts are like that. Hospitals, they always have things you can't quite explain, she said casually. Her words didn't bring me much comfort. In fact, they made me even more uneasy. As a novice nurse, I knew that many strange stories circulated around hospitals, but seeing it with my own eyes made it difficult to dismiss. The following nights grew increasingly strange. Every night, around 2 a.m., the elevator would chime, and the doors would open and close, always empty. Sometimes, the laughter would return, faint and fleeting, yet clear enough to send chills through me. On the fifth night, I decided that I couldn't just let this continue without finding out what was going on. I had to see for myself what was happening with the elevator. Doors opening, and the mechanical voice of the elevator echoed down the hallway. I stood at the threshold of the elevator, holding my breath. When the doors slowly opened, my heart raced. Inside, there was nothing. I stepped closer, carefully inspecting the interior, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the strange events. Just then, a cold draft blew from behind me. I turned abruptly, and at the far end of the hallway, I saw a small, dark figure. It moved swiftly, darting down the corridor like a child running. My eyes widened in shock, my heart beat so rapid it felt like it would burst out of my chest. But the shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving no trace. It was as if it had never been there at all. This translation captures the eerie atmosphere and events of the original passage while keeping the word count within 5,000 words. Let me know if you like further changes or expansions.